we're good.
It's doing its thing.
Okay.
I'll tell you what we should do live in a second. Live.
Today is Wednesday, March 10th, 2021. We'll call the meeting to order at 5:39 p.m. Agenda item number 2, to review the following cost center and budget articles. Schools and adult ed, followed by 6, 8, 9, and 10. You're gonna give it a intro or ready to go?
Hey, can I share my screen?
Sure. Go.
So following the same protocols that we followed last time, I'll just do a quick rundown and then we'll jump right in. Just goals reiterated, we're planning for our most vulnerable and remediating the impacts of the pandemic. Our anchor questions: what's in the best interest of our students? What is required for the work we know we want to do? What is fiscally responsible that aligns to research for high performing schools? And how do we balance the need that we know with the expense of school? We're going to start with adult education tonight, which Director Grant is actually here with us, and he'll lead us through some things that he's working with. Article 6, the system administration, we'll talk about things that are in the office of the superintendent, legal fees, adjustments, moving Karen from the existing spot to this office, just as an appropriate direction, and a healthcare reduction just from past employees to current employees. Bobby can walk us through that. In Article 8, which is student transportation, our team has done a very good job of updating some systems and rerouting some things. So we'll talk about transportation administration, regular transportation, special education transportation to an extent, but we'll also have special ed next week. And I put a note in here for summer school and alternative education transportation. We may touch on it, but just so you know, there's components there that we may touch on at the time connected to transportation. Then we'll shift to facilities and maintenance. We'll talk about operation and the maintenance of our plant, capital renewal, and renovations. When we get to debt service, you'll see a number where some of it is ongoing from past projects, but the big one for this year that is impacting the budget directly, and I'm actually excited to say that looks like Monday they'll be putting up the last piece of steel. And I don't know if you've gotten an invite yet, but if you haven't, we will soon to see if you want to come down early on Monday to take a picture with that last piece of steel and sign it if you have a chance to do so. That expansion project is well underway, going well, but there's a cost, and there's the debt service that is associated with that. We'll talk about those items, and then take some notes and gather any questions you may have. Without further ado, Director Grant, would you mind joining us? Stop my share so everyone can see.
Push any buttons, right?
Nope, you're good.
Okay. Thank you. It's good to be here tonight in person. I got to speak with you a few weeks ago about the poverty committee, but here to talk to you tonight about our adult ed budget. And I don't think it's as spectacular as kind of the work that was happening with the poverty committee. Coming into this budget year, we definitely were looking at having a flat amount for our local share, and you'll be able to read that in my memo. We've been able to do that kind of because of a couple things. One of those was in 2020, we did get a local share increase, which had an impact on our subsidy that we're planning to get next year. So we did get an increase in our our state subsidy. Also, since 2016, because of the cost sharing with Auburn and my position, we have been able to have some funds in our fund balance, and we're going to be using some of those fund balance funds to offset some increases we have. And the increases in our budget as far as expenditures go are mostly all due to salary and benefit obligations. Also, to know about the adult ed budget, you're kind of just seeing the one side of it, this local side, but we do have quite a bit of other funding streams that do come into adult education that we leverage this local funding to get. So those are grants, contracts, the state subsidy that I mentioned, and then also tuition and fees. Just kind of highlight where we are this year and to know that the pandemic definitely has had an effect on us. We have seen decreased numbers. The biggest decrease has been in our enrichment programming, which does, have an impact on some revenues when it comes to enrichment. And then we have seen some decreases in our academics. But really on the positive side is how much community organizations in this community is embracing this program and looking at how we can help folks that are having difficulties in this pandemic. And we did do some really innovative workforce programming this year. That one was right in the middle of when the pandemic was happening last year. But we also were able to put together programming in IT, our education program, and then healthcare, and our construction program as well, and run those programs almost seamlessly with in-person classes. And, well, I should say a hybrid, because we did do a hybrid with those. So we're pretty proud of that. So looking forward to 2022, really like what we are going to be looking at is how we interface with the community. And again, you'll be able to read this in my memo, but you will probably see a lot of our effort with the Strength in LA effort that's happening with workforce development, that the chamber is the convener of that. Also the poverty committee, I'm still an active participant on that, but I definitely think that our adult ed program is going to be a big part of that. Also our English language learning program, I was fortunate to kind of inherit that program, but that program and the staff in our program there continue to be innovative throughout the state. And we continue to put together different programming to work with English language learners, but also connecting that to careers and aspirational outcomes. Our connection with the kind of K-12 system, we are one of those pathways to a diploma, or I should say a high school credential, and we continue to strengthen that. I was just asked for survey data from the state director about students that have been coming to us because of the pandemic, but we probably know we're going to see some things down the road with credits and things, and we're going to have to be creative. And so we do provide that pathway for the traditional route that might not be working for somebody to be able to earn a credential. I do highlight in my memo to you that is a partnership with Auburn Adult Ed. Auburn Adult Ed has a large adult diploma program, and we utilize that, leveraging that to be able to maximize what we do for students in the Lewiston-Auburn area. And then the final thing I just wanted to highlight was COVID funds. We were very fortunate when the second round of CRF funds came out that the state allocated money specific to adult education, and Lewiston was a pretty good receiver of some funds there. And that really allowed us to connect with our students. So as I mentioned that, the pandemic has had an effect on us, but when we were able to access large amounts of technology, I'm talking, Dave, 60 laptops or so, that we've never had in adult education, we were able to get those and into the hands of our students so that they could connect to their classes and things in a hybrid type model. So we were very fortunate, again, to get those funds, and we've really learned a lot of best practices from that to be able to kind of carry into what we're doing. So that's kind of a quick highlight, and I'm willing to take any questions.
Just while we got you, Director Grant, I want to thank you for being incredibly efficient with the resources you do have available to you, and your consistent effort, you and your team, for reaching out to students from all ages, including conversations we've had even recently about pathways for students. while some people preach graduation rate, and I don't want to see ours go down, I want to increase pathways for students to get to a place where they can be productive citizens and own the lifestyle they choose to live. Because they have access to credentialing programs, they have access to graduation programs, and they can continue their education beyond whatever that prior stoppage might have been if we didn't have the pathway. And so I know that Mr. Grant works hard with our teams to talk about ways in which we can support high school students on those pathways and beyond. And we're looking to close any gaps or barriers that exist there. He's been a willing partner and has come up with some creative ideas. So I want to thank you in front of the committee for that work.
Thank you. I have to give credit to my team. You know, this is our community's adult ed program, and my staff oftentimes is behind those ideas and things. So thank you, Jake.
My apologies. Is this a part of an article, or is this a separate? Where are we looking at numbers here?
So we cover it separately as a cost center. Bob, do you want to recommend spaces to look within the article for adult ed?
Yes, so it's in your binder and it's in the back. And you know what, I'm not sure what tab it is, but you'll find it in the back of your binder. And it's really not part of an article, but it's given to you. You are obligated to vote upon the adult ed budget because it has a local, request for revenue. And that is something under your purview. So it's not necessarily part of an article, it's a standalone addition.
It's under tab 8.
Yeah.
Yes.
I know you guys moved upstairs. What kind of impact does that really have?
So that's actually been a tremendous impact. I don't know how we would have continued any services during the pandemic had we not been upstairs, number one. We moved upstairs in the Longland building, for those that don't know, in January of 2020. And we're just kind of getting used to all of our stuff, and almost a year ago to the date, obviously dealt with the pandemic, but that has been a huge asset for us. It's also kind of served for us for the first time in adult ed history in Lewiston. We are all under one roof because of the construction project happening up at the high school. We decided, and it was impacting our offices up at the high school, we decided that we'd move all of our staff down to Longley School and are utilizing space in there. It kind of feels a little tight sometimes, but you know, again, because of what's going on with the pandemic, it's been tremendous. I really don't know where we would be if we weren't where we are right now. So it's our staff, our students, I think, feel more valued being upstairs, having windows in classrooms, being in actual classrooms. And it's also given us flexibility to be able to do some of the training programs that we might have to wait for because we didn't have the space. So we've been doing, this is a partnership with Auburn, but we've been doing CNA recertification tests. That's something we always had to wait kind of till the end of the school day to be able to do. And now we're much more flexible being able to offer that. So it's been a tremendous opportunity for us. Thank you.
Mr. Watt.
Bill, 2 questions. One, space-wise that you have now, are you trying, would you say you don't have enough, you're just right, or you have too much?
I would say right now we have just enough. I would say that as we start to move into more normalcy, you know, it's going to be like anything where we'll probably be squawking about space, or we'll be saying like we got to be, you know, utilizing this space to the max. But right now, I would say that we're right where we need to be. We do have kind of something coming in the future. The B Street facility that we haven't been utilizing that just because of trying to get in there with COVID and everything. We have that staff down with us too. But the B Street facility, Lewiston Housing is going to be converting that all into a clinic. So we will probably be losing those 3 classrooms up there. Not immediate, but you know, that's something to consider. But also, the housing authority has talked with us about, you know, if we're short in space, maybe we can work with them to look at other places we could be in things, so.
Second question is your interaction with the different levels of the students. And I'm talking about the school age students, not adult. Pardon me, my vision goes every now and then. So, we have, just in Long Way alone, we have the alternative education piece. We have our resource center developing downstairs. We have Tree Streets. And of course, you have the high school up the hill. What level of connection do you have? Do you have regular connections with these entities in crafting the future pathways that can connect where they're at, where they're going to go, that you can offer?
Yeah, so, you know, Adult Ed, I think, is the historian of that facility, right? And just the historian, those are new programs, but we have definitely worked with those staff and been proactive with the staff on things that their students might need, and kind of have fostered an environment of come ask us questions about things. Come ask us questions about what we can do. You know, and there's some kind of anecdotal things we could share, but students who kind of need something added to their curriculum but are still in school, we've worked with one student to try to figure out avenues for there. But that's, you know, in my mind, that's a continuous improvement thing that we have to do all the time. We have to keep our fingers on the pulse so that we can make those opportunities available to students, really. One of the things about adult education, and it's probably why I've spent now a majority of my career in it, is how much you get out into the community. And this is where you hear about opportunities that can benefit our K-12 system. And you know, I think of all the time when I'm in a community meeting, not only how is this going to benefit adult education, but how is this going to benefit the organization that I'm sitting there representing, which is Lewiston Public Schools. And so I think that helps bring another resource to those there. And again, I only see more and more collaboration happening, particularly around where we've got to build pathways to ensure people get that cornerstone, which is the high school credential. And not everybody kind of achieves that the same. And when we're talking pathways that are different, you know, we have to have those and we have to be efficient. And so I think it's a great place to be for us and to be able to work with the staff in those programs. Absolutely.
Ms. Hawkins?
As someone who went through adult ed before I started college and saved me probably $5,000 or $6,000 at least in tuition, I'm very glad to see the work that you continue to do with adult ed, both in Lewiston and Ann Arbor. I was gonna say keep it up. From your memo, you have what I think is a good dial on what's going on, and keep it up.
Thanks, Lynette. And there's always somebody on the school committee who brings up programming that I failed to bring up. And one of those is transitioning to college. But we've actually kind of switched that language where we say transitioning to career and college. And so that grant has shifted because our workforce, you know, Bruce, we were talking before this, like how old staff are. I mean, we are, even though we're in a pandemic and unemployment is low, we are in a situation where we need workers and we have to train everybody we have. And Lewiston is a bright spot in the state of Maine when it comes to building a workforce, because we have all of these pieces here to do it. So, thanks for bringing that up, Lynette.
Ms. Wright?
Thank you, and thank you, Director Grant, for that presentation. Just returning to the numbers, I just want to clarify. So the local allocation, it looks like, is increased by 2.65%. Is that correct?
No, well, the local allocation, when you look at all of the revenue amounts, but if you look at the top line in that section, you'll see the local allocation. That is the funding that comes from the city's tax act. So revenue-wise, yes, the budget is up 2.65%, but the drivers in that are the increase that we received from the state subsidy. And from what we're gonna use for fund balance.
Local is flat. There's no
Okay.
increase to local.
Yep.
Okay, thank you. It's just formatted differently from the other budget, so I wanted to be clear. So local is flat. Great, thanks. Oh, and sorry, I wrote a note, but I didn't read it. I just met with a large employer in Lewiston earlier today, and one thing they were talking about, it's kind of a warehouse business, but transportation and logistics as another growth opportunity area. And I said I would mention it to adult ed when I was chatting with them tonight. So here it is.
All right, thank you, and I'll try to follow up with you about that.
Any other questions or comments? All right. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much.
We'll transition now to Article 6, which if you look at tab 2, second page, Article 6 is a third of the way down at the top. In here you can see again, school committee. You all are underpaid, but I know you're not asking for a raise. At least I haven't heard anybody ask for a raise.
Guess I haven't said it loud enough.
Office of the superintendent, which I mentioned the correction of having the assistant superintendent move from the curriculum area into the system administration where it belongs. Human resources items to the business office, and I'm actually going to have Bobby lead off with this one. She has some things that have been approved this year and some other things that are in the budget that we want to highlight.
Okay, great. So if we look at human resources, for the most part, what's driving this budget is contractual increases, and we also have an assistant HR director in this budget, and the amount of that assistant HR director is $65,000. You'll notice that advertising is up by $14,648, and that's a direct result of the recruiting that we would like to do to diversify our workforce. We need to do better at recruitment. Let's see, our software licenses for HR, that's our recurring contract renewal for our hiring and onboarding platform, which is called Clear Company. It's also our renewal for absence management. That's where all of our substitutes are. And then we also have our fees for ALICE training, which is school safety and security. Any questions about HR?
School committee. Do we ask questions about school committee, or are we going over that more?
Yeah, I'd be happy to do that.
I'm just looking at three years we have, 20, 21, and 22, and why it's different.
So, okay, so the cost drivers in the school committee, as you can see, let's see, it says other professional services school committee. That's up by $38,300. That's legal fees. So that's primarily what's driving the school committee up. Then you'll notice that there's additional, let's see, the stipends for the school committee, we have at $337 increase. And then all of the fringe that goes along with your stipend some of it has increased. That's all driven by different percentages, Main State Retirement or whatever. Let's see, Main State Retirement is up $681. Medicare and FICA is up $923. Workers' compensation, $292. That's what drives that budget. So it's primarily legal fees.
Ms. Ray.
I wanted to, while we're in school committee, revisit an idea that I believe member Majerus Collins deserves credit for. In a lot of our conversations this year in talking about legal, the idea was floated for in-house general counsel in order to reduce our reliance on that contracted service and make it a much more predictable figure year over year. Have someone who's really specialized in the work that we do. And I just wanted to float that again and hear if there were thoughts on that.
Mr. Driscoll.
I obviously strongly support the idea of having in-house counsel. This is a large and complicated entity that we're running here, and the prospect of having one lawyer doesn't seem like it's really outrageous. I think there's a decent chance that it'll end up saving us money, because if we have a flat rate for whatever the salary is, then we are not being billed hourly for most of the items that we would need counsel for. So I guess I would like to have that in the parking lot. I'm amenable to a suggestion from Chief Avery on the dollar figure for that proposal when we get back to it, but it strikes me that we'd be looking at somewhere in the vicinity of $100,000. And the idea would be that that would be not in addition to the budget, but a shift from allocated existing legal fees to reduced by $100,000 and hire in-house counsel to take care of most of our legal issues. I also wanted to ask about the issue of increasing school committee stipends, because my understanding is that that's not a thing that's happening. I absolutely think it should happen, but I don't know where that's coming from.
It has increased by 3%, and by, I think it's $337. Yeah.
So
What does that mean?
I don't understand how that, because the rate of pay for school committee members is set by city ordinance at $100 a month or $1,200 a year.
So we put in each year, we put in an additional, typically it's 3%. And so if that's something that you want out, I mean, we can definitely take it out, but that's typically what we put in.
I mean, it's fine. It's a small amount of money. If that's what's typically done, it's typically done, but I'm still trying to get to like the discrepancy between, I mean, did we all get raises in January and not realize it? Like, I'm trying to understand what's going on here.
I actually don't know what your paycheck, I never see those, but I can certainly look at that and see if you did. You didn't, Alicia? No.
Yeah, so I think this is set by city ordinance, and I'd be sort of curious if we were plugging away at 3% increases a year. That's the kind of thing that I think that we ought to do, that I hope that our city council rep will bring to the folks who make that decision. But the school committee members make less than half of what city councilors make. Barely more than a quarter of what county commissioners make, and I can tell you that those folks don't work as hard as we do. But the point here is that the rate of pay is set by city ordinance. So it's not our decision. It's not up to us. It's up to the city council to determine the rate of pay for all elected officials in Lewiston. And so I guess I'm just sort of hoping that there can be some review of that.
So we can make a reduction. It would be about $769 to make a reduction to bring it back to $1,200.
Sure. I mean, like I don't understand what is there a reason that we've been plugging along with 3% increases when the city hasn't raised our pay?
So it's just something that has always been done. I can't tell you the reason for that. We've just maintained it, but we can certainly we can take the $770 out. I can't answer that question.
Where
We've
does
just
it
maintained
come?
it.
Does it
What's
just
that?
year after year?
Fund balance. No, I mean,
I don't understand.
Chief Avery, I'm not asking you to take it out. But it is a little odd. You know, if I suppose it gives the district a little bit of leeway in the event that the council did go ahead and bring pay somewhat more proportional to what it ought to be. But then if it doesn't get spent, then it just goes into the fund balance, right? That's how this works.
Yes, yep, it does. Or it actually doesn't necessarily hit the fund balance first. It depends on, so as an example, let's say the budget, in this case, it's $163,000. And let's say in FY '22, the actual, I'm just making it up, is $170,000.
Okay,
So it does not hit the fund balance in that case. It will actually be absorbed. That $769 would be absorbed for what we went over for other expenses. And typically in the school committee section of this article, it is legal.
okay. I mean, I'm not asking for it to be in the parking lot. I appreciate the explanation. And I really do think that, that the city council should take a look at that.
One of the things you listed, Bobby, was retirement. Our school committee members, they're somehow included in the state retirement.
So we have in the budget, let's see, 600 and I'm rounding up, $681. I'm not sure if any of you, I'd have to look, everybody is different. So I would have to look at each one of your pay stubs to see if we've charged Maine State Retirement. This is a calculation that's driven from Munis, from our accounting software. So you might, I mean, I can look at them too. You can look at your advice slip to see if you're being assessed any type of Maine State Retirement. I'd have to do an individual review of each one of you, which I'm happy to do.
Ms. Wright.
Yeah, I just wanted to continue this line of questioning. I apologize if we're belaboring it, but you know, I'm in my 4th year on this committee and there hasn't been a change in my $92 a month that hits my bank account, which is, you know, a real perk, but yeah, definitely works out to like a penny an hour. So I mean, if folks on here want to ask me to go for, I mean, I wouldn't go for it unless there was a binding vote, I think, with council to ask them to raise the salaries if that's what folks want. But yeah, it definitely is set by ordinance. Sorry, I was furiously searching for which section of ordinance. It's in chapter 2, section 1, section 2-76 is salaries of elected and appointed officials. So that's where it's prescribed in city parlance. And then sorry, I scrolled right by it. It says, I think exactly what Member Madeiras Collins was saying. School committee, each member of the school committee shall receive a salary at the rate of $1,200 per year payable monthly. So that's what the city has ruled. Again, if you want me to go to back for everyone on the council, happy to do so, but I would prefer we take a vote on that before that moves forward. Yeah.
Mr. Madeiras.
Member Ray, since you're looking at it, could you refresh our memories as to what the council rate of pay is?
Sure. Oh, sorry, I left my hand up. So 2-76, the second article is city council. Each of the councilors shall receive an annual salary of $2,700 payable monthly.
I mean, nobody's getting rich serving the public here, and nobody should. But it doesn't strike me as unreasonable to suggest that the two positions ought to be paid the same. And council might deserve a little raise, but the more salient issue is that, you know, you don't get paid for when it comes to public service.
If you're asking, I spend a lot more time on school community than council.
So a couple things. One, just real quickly, not that I want to advocate for a raise, but I'll just make this statement that I looked at my books last year, and doing this job cost me $3,000 from my job. And I think that it's reasonable that at least it shouldn't, yes, it's public service, but it shouldn't cost you to have to do this. So, I mean, I think there's something to be said about reasonable compensation. And for us to have, and I'll say it again, the third largest municipal budget in the state. And we're doing this for $100 a month. I'm just a big critic about Maine politics in general, about how they pay or don't pay. Bobby, a second question to you. We just sat here and we talked about $700 that's on a line that doesn't exist for us. Then we talked about a line that costs $600 that exists and doesn't apply to us. Is this and it's not a criticism, don't take it this way. I know these things are a lot of computer operated across the board. Is this a standard accounting practice that is applying in other portions of this budget? I mean, just what we talked about, we got $1,500 that's being budgeted, and we have nothing to do with it, and it doesn't go to where it's applicable to go. So I'm wondering, as you're talking, are there other lines that the same formula carries through that we have to start taking a look at?
So, Member Potvin, the Main State Retirement, the $600, like I said, I'd have to research, so I can't substantiate that. I mean, you might be right. I'd have to look. As far as other lines, the school committee stipends are not like all the rest of the budget. You're not really employees of the school department, so it's your setup. It's very, very complex to explain, but I'll try. Every single person is set up with a job salary screen. You're not. So the school committee looks very, very different because you're not an employee. So how we calculate you is a little bit different than the rest of like a traditional salary account would be. So my answer to you is no, I don't believe that you have to be worried about the rest of the budget. I'm happy to, like I said, I'm happy to look at the Main State Retirement. As far as the 3% on the school committee, I mean, that's what has been happening all along. I can't, like I said, I can't answer. I can't tell you why. But I think it's, and I'm gonna be firm, but respectful. I think it is not reasonable to jump to think that the rest of the budget is not appropriate.
I don't know if this is something that you have right now, Bobby, or if you could get it for us in an email in the future. Could you send us the actual attorney's fees for fiscal year 20 and 21? Well, 21 hasn't completed yet. For the last 2 years, what the actual legal fees have been?
Can we go 3 actually?
3, okay, 3 years. The last 3 years.
I'm happy to go out as far as you want. So yes, I would be happy to put that together.
Perfect, thank you. Mr. Viveros-Collins.
Yeah, I wanted to ask on the on 2 things. The first one being the Main State Retirement question as it pertains to school committee members. My understanding was the same with Member Poppins, that we were not eligible for that. And so I guess I'm interested to know if that's an incorrect impression. And otherwise, if it's not, then it really seems like it shouldn't be a line item in the budget. If it's for something that literally doesn't apply to us, and if it does, then I should talk to HR. But the more salient question and the bigger question is, I guess I would like to encourage a discussion here, at least initially, and I'm interested in hearing people's perspectives on the idea of in-house counsel, because the more conversation we have now, the hypothetically, the less we have in the meeting that has a parade of amendment votes.
One thing I'd like to share just about legal, and I agree that that's a big number, and we should look harder at that. As from a perspective of schools, we have legal that are involved in special ed law specifically. We have legal that's involved with human resources specifically. We have legal that's involved in contracts and negotiations specifically. So some of our legal fees, and we can get you more information. It wouldn't be the expertise of one person that could provide all of that function. We don't even use just one law firm. We actually use a couple because of the different areas of specialty that people work in. So I do think it's worth a closer look. It's a big number. I just want to make sure that people are aware that if we found that one person that had that level of expertise in all those different areas, they would not be able to keep up with modern practice. And so even if we did something internal, I would still envision external legal fees for the nature of some of the different things that we do that require specific expertise that no one lawyer would typically care.
Do all of those legal fees fall under school committee, even the special ed legal fees? And
No.
so the ones that fall under school committee are exclusively school committee related legal fees, like contract.
Yeah.
That's right.
Okay,
That
so
would be
there's
more
other
to
legal
the
fees in
charge.
this budget somewhere else as well?
Yes, so I if I may, I'd like to reiterate what Jake just said. I want to, I think we should look at it, and I can definitely, I'll put that information together. Please keep in mind that this is a true specialty. School law is a true specialty, and we want to be very careful about bringing, if we did, bringing somebody on that doesn't have that school specialty experience. And so to answer your question, the legal fees for the school committee are around things that arrive either through negotiations or through HR related, employee related, or personnel related activities or events. Special ed is outside of the school committee legal fee category, and we use a different law firm for special education. So it is spread out.
Mr. Madeiras.
Chief Avery, were you about to tell us a number or no? Because it kind of sounded like we're building to a number, the legal fees under school committee, and then a number, but then there was no number. And if there isn't a number, that's fine. But I guess what I'm most interested in terms of this discussion is whether, and I somewhat strongly believe that this is what we do, whether we have had more than $100,000 worth of billable hours associated with a particular attorney. And if that's the case, then we should just replace that with in-house counsel that specializes in those areas. That strikes me as obvious. And then rather than be in a constant state of concern about whether consulting a lawyer is worth it, we have one on staff. And so we never need to be worried about whether consulting a lawyer is worth it because it doesn't cost anything. It's built in, it's part of the district administration.
So no, I was not going to give you a number, but I am going to come back on Monday with that 4 years of history.
Yeah, no worries.
Can you, when you bring those numbers back to us, can you have, I guess, two separate categories of what falls under the school committee for legal fees and what falls outside of school committee for legal fees? The total district-wide for legal fees, but separated.
Absolutely, yes.
Ms. Ray.
Thank you. So I just want to really, sorry, can you guys hear me? It's not.
Yes.
Okay. I just really want to hone in on the point that there have been times when we are consulting for legal where I personally have felt a lot of pressure to just wrap it up because of the time spent. And I know I've also expressed to this committee before that, we should deal with public matters first in a public meeting and then deal with legal at the end, even if it's going to take a long time and we can't predict when that is. I think it's just most sensible to proceed in that manner that continues to put our public first, and then have someone who we're not counting the pennies out to them at the end of the meeting. So I just wanted to raise those personal feelings again as we have this conversation and this consideration going forward. I'm glad to hear that we're going to be able to separate out what the school committee uses versus the other specialties that we need help with, because I do think specialization is important, but definitely want to throw my support behind having someone who is kind of at our disposal, and we're not worried about taxes on that person when we do need the help.
So just now we move to student transportation, and I know that Bobby has this down packed, but I also know that we have Don Rancourt and Alyssa Roman available. Should we have any questions for them? And so,
Jake, should we finish that article just for transparency's sake?
yes, I'm sorry. I thought we.
That's okay. I just want to make sure that we were on the record and we talked about all of the components of system administration. Okay, so we've talked about HR, we've talked about the school committee. Now we're going to talk about the business office and the drivers. So that budget right now is up by $54,483, or an 8.01% increase. And the primary drivers of that is the contractual increases, and also the funding that you approved. Thank you very much. That you approved this fiscal year for the payroll administrator as well as the payroll specialist. That is now that goes into the FY22 budget. You'll notice that under contracted services for the business office, that's up by $14,615. We are actually invoiced by the city of Lewiston for overhead charges. That is what that is driving. That's driving that, as well as this is where we charge our auditing expenses to. And then dues. You'll notice dues and fees business office, that's up by $2,500. This has to do with our accounting software and the normal increase that we get per year. Any questions about the business office?
We're good. All right.
No.
Sorry, I thought we had covered. Now looking at Article 8, student transportation.
So Dawn and Alyssa are here. Alyssa and Dawn, I'm just going to get us started, and then you can talk about the particulars. I do want to let this committee know that Dawn and Alyssa spent a great deal of time reviewing every single transportation account line. They really sharpened their pencil. They looked at exactly how we're using our runs, where we're using them, and realigned the budget to properly, if you will, reflect where expenses are actually being charged to. You'll notice that this, and we'll break that down for you here in just a minute, so you understand really what I just said. The article is actually down overall by just under $26,000, about $26,000. And Alyssa, if you want to talk about all of the ins and outs of each line.
I can. Oh, look, I don't know how to make my picture show up. At least I am not a cat, so I will apologize.
Food?
Yeah, at least it's food. I should have a bus up there for you. So it did not come up asking me to switch my picture, or else I would happily do that. So if there's anything on Dave's end he can do to help me, I will take that advice. But in the meantime, while you're staring at my lovely food picture, I can certainly talk about student transportation. What you guys are looking at, to reiterate what Bobby just said, is Dawn Rancourt. I give her many accolades, and one of the things she took on wholeheartedly was really tracking through our computerized system all the bills that have come in through Hudson Bus Lines, fuel bills, bus bills, special education needs, everything that is going on, and really did a really good hard analysis. We used to have multiple budget sheets we did to balance this work, and she consolidated it down to one. And one of those things that it really allowed us to do was look at our vehicles and say, does that bus do multiple runs in a day? Which it does. So we have buses that are going quite far in a day to numerous schools, elementary, middle school, and high school. And so when we looked back, and some of them are doing special education and doing a regular school runs. When we went back, we devised so that we have a daily rate for the bus, that they are evenly distributed amongst the programs that use them. So what you're going to see is a little bit of realignment of the numbers. This is a one and done adjustment because in future years, we're going to use this template to have actual math represent the actual vehicles being used. So I do give Dawn a lot of credit because she went through and made sure to track down each vehicle. So some of the information that's helpful for you guys: how many full-size buses do we have? And can we bus every kid that needs transportation in our district? Because that would be what I'm concerned about is, great, how much money are we spending and are we actually going to have a successful program? So what we're presenting to you would encapsulate roughly 39 full-size buses, 12 minibuses, 2 wheelchair buses, and 26 minivans from the Hudson Transportation Fleet. What we're also included in here, which is good to know, is through COVID relief funds, we were able to purchase some minivans to be used to facilitate in some of our really specialized needs in our schools. So Hudson contracts for 2 hours in the morning, 2 hours in the afternoon. If we go over that, they do charge us a small fee. It's called an overage. It's a lot cheaper than a full-size bus, which we're grateful for. But we do have these additional minivans in our district, and the plan is we do get those calls midday. We have a child that needs to go home. We've had to rely on taxis in the past, or some really creative ways of transporting a student. And having those vans will make those and that process a lot easier for those schools, as well as when we have supplies and things that need to go out. So they're going to extend well past COVID relief and pandemic relief, but along with those vans comes maintenance costs and some fees to get them going. They are brand new vans, so maintenance costs aren't really going to be sky high in the first couple of years, but we definitely need to factor in some of those things with those vans. Overall fuel prices, we get that number from Public Works. They take their best guess. We can all take a best guess on where gasoline fuel costs are going to be. So we did factor those in, and part of that realignment is saying, all right, we know this vehicle is on the road and going to these departments. We also realign those gas fuel costs to go with it. One of the fees, dues and fees, that line didn't exist before. We were able to connect our Power School enrollment system with our free to us TransFinder routing system, which we're moving off Excel sheets and we're trying to get more digitalized, so better transparency in what we're routing. So into TransFinder, which is a free state software program, and then connect that program with Hudson Bus Line's Synovia program, which is a GPS and speed. So when we get calls that a bus is going 25 down a street, we can confirm that and tell them if the door was open and shut and lights were on. So what you're looking at for a fee there is, while the software of TransFinder is free to us, the connection of connecting the two does have a yearly subscription cost. The benefit to the department is a better routing system that's more accurate. We look for deadheading miles where we have buses that are driving the street with no kids in them. That's never a good thing. So we don't want to see that, and we want to see the most bang for our buck. Not keeping kids crammed in to a bus, but also not having a fully empty bus going down the street. So TransFinder helps us find some of those areas to optimize our routes and our buses, so we don't go by a student's house 3 times in the morning, which is really beneficial. It doesn't take into effect our one-way streets in places, speed limits, sides of the street, all that good stuff. And then the further benefit to the parents is accurate GPS. So right now, the best I could do for you is say the bus is within 5-mile radius of your house. Well, that encompasses quite a bit of the city. So this software will also allow a parent feature, so the parents will have a better idea of where their school bus is with their kid, which is something that is so valuable to all of us right now. I'm willing to pass this on to Dawn. Hopefully she is a live picture and not just food to show you at dinner time. If you have any questions for me, I'm happy to answer them as well.
Alyssa?
Yes.
Aaron, I didn't want to interrupt you, but I was waiting for it to be your turn to move you as a panelist, but you started so quickly that I didn't want to interrupt you. So I'm going to move you to a panelist so then we can see you.
I dressed all up for this, I swear.
So you should be able to turn your camera on now.
Wonderful. Thank you.
You were on a roll. Sorry.
I have been shooting from the hip a little bit today. I met with all of our representatives in Congress today. So I've had a very Zoom-filled day, and technology does not always work. And so we roll with the punches, but it was a good meeting with all our representatives in DC over Zoom. So I'm happy to answer any questions you guys might have on what I said or any clarification. And I don't know if Dawn has anything she would like to add as well.
How many vans are there total that's been purchased, and are they stationed at each school, or are they at one spot, so not to go get them?
So we have purchased in total for the schoolhouses 14 vans, so 7 schools, 2 vans per school. Some of the work, they are not currently driving down the road right now. So what we're finalizing there is making sure that can we get gas in the vehicle, and do we have insurance coverage and all those things. We want to make sure that they are ready to roll down the road, but they are on site. They have Lewiston Public Schools logos on them to support the schoolhouses in those midday activities and or potential field trips or things of that nature in the future. They are, I think they're 7 passenger is what we went with for those vans. So they're not in the 15 passenger or over 10 passenger where you would experience a higher likelihood that you would have to have more credentials. So these are really meant for really kind of in between buildings and stuff like that. This is not to take place of the transportation system and contract with Hudson.
And what is the additional cost of all that total?
So the additional vans that we purchased, we use relief funds for.
Yeah.
With the intent of bringing things to students, bringing back from students, fixing the tech, being able to go to them. As we get back into school, things like field trips, things like assisting with transportation as needed for different school events or teacher conferences. So those pieces, we were able to get them all new with the thinking that they should last us a bit. LRTC has talked to us about how they can help with some of the servicing to reduce some of the cost. I don't know how sustainable that will be as we move years and years out. But in the short term, one of the things that we have seen, and I could probably get some data from you, from Rob Callahan, the reservation of the vans that existed beforehand were booked through his office, just because they exist at the high school. They're in use a lot. A few years back, we added to that stock, and they, again, kept being used constantly. We had a meeting just before this, and it was brought up for the store next door and the effort around those resources. And one of the things they asked for is, can we use one of those vans? And so when they get donations or they need to go find kids or move things around, they would have resources for that. But there will be a cost associated with it.
Do we know that cost, like in terms of, like, I mean, estimate, obviously, it's not.
Yeah, the insurance was minimal to none because of our municipal policy,
Yeah.
I believe. But we have to, the team's been working to secure fire extinguishers, safety items, and things of that nature. We're also looking at a protocol for making sure the folks driving them should be driving them, even though they're employees. And so the cost that will be associated will be maintenance, oil changes, and of course, fuel for them to have go around. We can guess right now, but we've never had a fleet like this moving around, so it's not well prescribed until we know how they'll be utilized.
Okay. Is there an actual guess number yet, or no? Oh, no.
Yeah, Alyssa, Dawn, or Bobby, do you have I know that there was at one point in time we could talk about what a potential cost could be to run them.
So unless Bobby knows one right off the top of the head, and I am not cooking tonight, and my fire alarm keeps going off because my family's cooking. So I'm just going to say sorry about that. When we looked at those fees, Jake is absolutely right, where our insurance costs are going to be covering if we have our policies in place for our drivers. The fuel costs, again, we're getting from Public Works, so we can take our best guess. I have pulled up on a side sheet, so I'd be prepared for questions like this. on roughly what our fuel cost is. And let's see, roughly the price per gallon. And again, it's flexible. We all know that was averaged. We're going to go with the word average, around $2.15 per gallon from Public Works. And that was the average we based it on at the time. Now we know that prices fluctuate on gasoline depending on the market. So that is our educated guess on that. As far as oil changes and that, again, you have 14 vehicles. We don't even know if we're going to hit that mileage or oil change necessity, even in the little bit of driving. So we have no, because we don't have a fleet like this, we don't have built in there if it's one oil change a year, 2, 3, 4, but we do have tracking on that. So really where I know I was talking with Bobby the other day, which we were really looking at the why are we up 7.85% in regular transportation costs? And some of that we can say 4% increase with Hudson, and then we know that some of those fuel costs and those van costs could potentially impact that budget line. And so what you're looking at is kind of in that line of that 7.8. You see minuses in some other areas too. So we're kind of evaluating. And Bobby, I'm not sure if we actually discussed the actual number.
We have not discussed the actual number. We've tossed around all of the different accessories that we need, but we can come up with an estimate. I do believe that we can do that. It would be just that, as mentioned multiple times. I mean, we've never had a fleet like this before, but it's not an unreasonable request to ask us to come up with some type of number of how many miles we think we're going to be driving those. In any year. I think we could do that. We do have car seats that we need to plan for. There's a lot. There's a lot of accessory that needs to go along with that.
The one good thing is my light got really bright. The one good thing is the municipal registration for a vehicle for a Maine. It's good for 10 years, and it cost us like a big goose egg, nothing. So we're pretty, I wish we could all have 10-year registrations on our vehicles. So that is something that is good. So these are municipal vehicles. That's how they're labeled in the system.
I have one last thought. Also, so you might want to, Central Maine Community College has an auto program. So if the program over here is other things going on, you might want to reach out to your partner.
Mr. Bopel.
Purchase process, I'm just concerned that happened before me with those beautiful vans put for bid, or how did we acquire those?
Yeah, Melissa actually worked through a process to acquire them. The different rules around it, they were actually bought direct from Detroit or what, but it was out of the Midwest and shipped here as part of a purchase so that they could be, so we can maximize the savings with our relief funds.
Mr. Response.
What is the virtue of contracting out for transportation services?
I'm sorry, I missed part of that.
What is the virtue for contracting out for transportation services?
As opposed to having it in-house?
Yes.
So, and I know Bobby can certainly speak to this probably better than I even can, because she came from a district that did their own in-house fleet management. So when you're looking at having fleet management in-house, you're looking at the cost of the vehicles. There is a replacement and purchasing plan that needs to be followed through the Department of Education. You have to look at your mileage, how much those vehicles are on the road. So you have your bus, plus you have your maintenance workers, because when the bus breaks, you got to have your repair people on hand, on staff to be able to repair that bus and get it back on the road. Vans included, so they need to know diesel and they need to know gasoline-based vehicles. You need a safe place to do that, so you need a bus garage that can fit those buses in there as well, so a physical facility for all of that. Plus, you need the technology along with that, so you're talking camera packages, GPS packages, radio packages. Then you're talking HR on that side. So you need your drivers, CDL clearinghouse, professional development, your terminal managers to make sure that the buses are routing correctly and working together with it. Terminal manager support for backup included with that. I think I mentioned professional development, but retraining. Also, when you're when you have an accident, you have to be prepared to send those employees for drug and alcohol testing and do it randomly because that's in accordance with the CDL guidelines. I could probably go on for a little bit more, but there is a tremendous amount of cost that is truly enveloped in that Hudson contract with them, again, giving that raise to their employees. I am completely grateful on a daily basis that our connection with Hudson is one that we can call up and say, this bus needs to go here. When I get a call that there's been a bus accident, I'm more concerned about, do those students have the right support at the school? Have parents been informed? I don't have to worry about the bus getting back to the facility. I don't have to worry about the accident report, well, unless we need to. The repairs, any maintenance or anything on those vehicles. So there's this tremendous amount of, we can focus on getting kids to and from school without that overhead, thanks to that contract.
I'd like to say, Alyssa, wow, you just did a fantastic job. So she's spot on. I will say in my former district, I was asked to evaluate contracting out. We had an incredible fleet. We had everything that Alyssa just described. And it ended up with your own fleet, if you've got it, at that time, and this was probably 10 years ago, 11, 12 years ago. If you've got your own fleet and you've got your own infrastructure, then it's probably not, at that time, it wasn't the best idea to contract out. And so we chose not to. It would be an incredibly huge expense for Lewiston to move in the other direction. But everything Alyssa just said is spot on.
With a follow-up question, I appreciate that the transportation process is complicated and involves lots of costs, but aren't we paying for those things in the contract? I mean, all of the expenses that were just outlined, we're still paying for them when we write a check to Hudson.
We are.
Aren't we?
We are, with the exception that we're not purchasing buses.
Okay.
We're purchasing the use of a bus. They're doing the purchasing. So if you want to, and I think buses are around, Alyssa, I don't know what they are, around 95 right now.
167,000 for a
For
year.
not,
Oh,
well,
for a bus?
no. I mean, just to buy a bus. Yeah, it's around.
Yeah,
I think it's
So-
around 95,000.
Yep.
So, and how many buses do we have right now?
39.
So.
And then
if
you have mini buses in there
exactly.
as well.
Yeah.
But let me just put it like this. Hudson wouldn't exist if they didn't turn a profit. So I guess what I'm trying to understand is how does this contract save the district money, or does it save the district money?
It saves us a ton of money because we don't have to purchase all of the buses, all of the vans, all of the mini buses. If you wanted to go in the other direction, if we already had all of that in place, I'm not convinced it would save us money.
And then you're looking at potentially additional administration costs that we would have to obviously keep them in touch or in the scope of our personnel policies, which could greatly affect where we're at. You're right, we are contracted with someone that is for profit. And so when you do contract with those type of companies, you have to say, what am I saving? What is the benefit for us doing this work? And for us, we have Dawn, who's doing that routing on a day-to-day basis. You have me that's also paying attention to the inner workings of this. We do not, under our current capacity, have the ability to do all those things that Hudson does smoothly. And when we're looking at a larger district to do that in-house, you're also looking at the facilities. So I know Hudson built that brand new facility. They moved their bus facility. And when I'm looking at that, for us to have a facility, Public Works isn't big enough for that size fleet. Having someone go into that bus facility and clean it, we need custodial help now. We need paper supplies. We need electric costs, all those things also. And yes, Hudson arguably has to pay for those as well. But what we're seeing is the services that are provided, the HR fluctuation that we would incur as well. So all those employees now residing under us also means a bigger HR load for our HR department.
I think it's also important to note that within this new contract that we agreed to move forward, there's a 6% salary increase to the drivers. Our contract increase is 4%. So the drivers are going to receive a much larger percentage than what we're actually going to be paying overall. So that's a savings to us as well.
Okay, but I'm still confused here because if, if bringing this into the school district would require additional HR staff, doesn't that mean that Hudson needs that HR staff, and doesn't that mean we're paying for it in what we pay for the services? What I'm trying to understand is how, what is the market logic of doing this contract? How does Hudson save money? Or ultimately, are we not saving money doing this, and it's just a question of the upfront cost being extensive?
So I believe that if we had the infrastructure in place, this is just what I think. I mean, we could do an analysis, but if we had all of the infrastructure in place, if we had the entire fleet purchased, if we had all of everything else, outlined, without going through all of that again, if we had all of that in place and we were rolling, I'm not convinced that we would save money if we contracted out. But we don't have all of that in place. And to get to a place to have all of that would be big bucks, huge money, to bring us there. So unfortunately, in my opinion, I mean, I don't know how many years Lewiston has been without a fleet, but I think it's been a very, very long time. It'd be very costly.
Two more questions. Does Auburn contract for their transportation services, or do they have an in-house fleet? So they're running it through their district.
Yes.
Does Hudson have any other major clients?
They do not. We are their primary client. However, they do take on other things. So if the bus is 2 hours in the morning, 2 hours afternoon, if there's something we don't need that fleet for, they will contract out, but we are their primary focus. So will they do a wedding on a weekend? Yeah, they will. Will they also make sure to take our kids where they need to go on those weekend activities? Yes, they will. So because they are a business, they do use those buses for other things as well. We are their primary responsibility. So that's where that contract, we can go back and be like, you set a bus on the road at that time, we need it there, and it happens.
So do they do transportation for any other school district?
Not that I'm aware of, because our capacity is full with our current, what we have. They do not have enough drivers. There's a national, well, they have enough drivers for us, but there's a national driver shortage. So they're like any business trying to fill in. If someone's out, someone has a doctor's appointment, they fill in and make it happen for us. So I'm not seeing them unless it's a weekend, midday, evening activity. They're not taking on anything during our school hours. That's with the contract, they're agreeing to our terms as far as our needs.
But just a quick add, I believe embedded somewhere in city charter, we do provide some rides to some of the private schools within our immediate area as part of the city charter. So you may see kids going to other schools on the STA Hudson buses.
Interesting.
That is part of our responsibility by charter.
Mr. Davis?
Yes.
But to be clear, Hudson is only a small wholly owned division of STA, right? And STA is one of the largest bus companies, school bus companies in the country. They have hundreds of fleets, right?
Correct.
So some of their administrative things probably are less because because of sheer mass. Well, they have systems in place that they can put here that they've already tried other places, and they're utilizing some of that to reduce the cost of this particular division because of their sheer size, and that's how they're also able to bring drivers in from other locations when they need it, right?
Yes.
Correct. They do have a central office that does all their billing, all their paperwork. They make sure everybody is up to date the terminal manager does handle the day-to-day operations, making sure that physicals are being done and license checks and things of that nature. But all the clerical type things, administrative type things are done out of a central office for all of their terminals at once. So in that respect, you do save a little bit of money because they're not paying just one group to deal with just one thing. They're doing it for a whole business.
Thank you, Administrator.
Ms. Wright.
Well, that was fun, but I wanted to go back to our memo that we got on the first night, in which it's listed as 4 items. I'm guessing it's actually kind of more like 3 items that have not been funded in this budget. An attendance coordinator, I assume that's / truancy coordinator, supplies and telephone expense. And I wanted to dig into the telephone expense and the attendance coordinator if possible, what those are, why they were taking out, and see where we go from there.
The initial one, the attendance coordinator, was really around students who are struggling to attend school and having someone that's a dedicated person that can help facilitate that process. Where it's landed currently is that Dawn does what she can, which is what she has for work is already a full-time job, so she does what she can. And then our administrative teams and our SROs and other people are also helping with that effort, especially this year. But in typical years, many districts have, and it exists within NEO, the state reporting system, who is your truancy officer? And we use attendance coordinator because I don't like the feel of truancy officer. But that was what that was originally proposed for, was someone that would help with that effort.
Okay, and is there a dollar amount associated with that?
So Bobby's looking.
Didn't we have Butch doing both before?
So this comes down to capacity, and Bobby, I think, found the number. Some of this comes down to capacity, and some of it's looking at what are our current ways of doing routing in the district. We are not on push pins and string on a map, but we are working on making this easier to do routing in the district. And then you throw in a truancy need request. So it's looking at, do you have the transportation department working 24/7 for these requests that come from 7 schools and up to 20 people requesting on one person these changes? Or do we change our systems to support that person? So there is leeway in there to say we're unrolling what we call bus dude, a way for schools to facilitate a better routing system, to give Dawn a better way of dealing with it. Dawn does a tremendous job. I just don't want to see her burn out. So if the SROs and other people are supporting some of those tasks, our truancy policy was updated to support a newer way of doing things. There's certainly a room for a better discussion there.
The budget number that was cut is $45,000 for the attendance coordinator with benefits.
Okay, I would like to add that to the parking lot and keep preserving that name that we're using, attendance coordinator rather than truancy officer. And then what was the telephone expense?
$1,500.
I would like to add that back as well. So parking lot for that. I assume that also has to do with attendance coordination.
Yes.
Okay, thanks.
Yep.
Any other questions on this? Mr. Pop.
So I may have been oblivious and missed it, but basically speaking, what is the prime driver to the $146,000 increase in regular transportation?
And I don't know if Bobby wants to go or if you would like me to speak.
You can go ahead. I've got the notes too, but you can as well.
So I know we have a 4% increase in our transportation budget for each vehicle as per the Hudson contract that was agreed upon a couple weeks ago. So I know that's one of our drivers in there. The other piece of that is we're also looking in particular at our special education out of district. When a student comes in our district and they require an IEP and it says individualized transportation, we are legally obligated to meet that need of that student. And so Dawn gets really creative on that, but the honest truth is we need vehicles to make that happen. She was also able to look at the budget and say, oh, and I might be wrong, I don't know if it was 7 vans. We have a lot of vans going to one particular location in southern Maine for special education. So we're looking to translate those into mini buses as well. A lot of what you're seeing is the 4% costs across the board for some of that driver in there. And then, which is your out of district placement students for your special education. That's a fair amount of that. And then your minivan addition with just adding some accessories is going to impact that as well.
Can we get a breakdown of specifically what the cost of the out of district transportation is on the placements? And have that for the parking lot when we come back to visit transportation?
So I think you can see that right in the
On there.
budget. You can see that it says student transportation ODP, $782,391. You'll see that there's a decrease in this budget for ODP, out of district placement. And that goes back to, and so when you asked, remember Potvin about regular transportation, we had explained at the beginning that Dawn and Alyssa looked at exactly how we were using our buses and our vans, and they sharpened their pencil, and it accounts for exactly what the runs look like, which you would say, well, why wasn't that always? And it should have been, it just wasn't done. So this was the year that they really examined exactly how we're using our vans and where our buses and where they're going. And that, so you'll see the offset, there's some increases in some of the lines, and then the offset is in ODP, out of district placement.
Right, if you want to look at what Ron's referring to, it's the bottom part is page 61 of the detail report, at the top of page 62.
What are the distance parameters for when we expect students to walk to school?
So we have that outlined in an agreed upon school committee policy. So it depends on the grade level that they're at. And then we also have certain roads that we've deemed to be not safe for students to be walking on. So I wish I knew that policy off the top of my head. That would be really handy right now. But in that policy, so we have students in there that we transport that are less than a mile. So for our younger grades, we're looking at a mile. For our older grades, I believe it's 1.25 miles. And then the other thing that we also have happening is if a student gives me a doctor's note, they broke their leg, their parents, whatever is happening in the family, their parents will give us a doctor's note. We will then make that adjustment in the route and transport. The other thing that we have going on is our districts. So we have students that are in McMahon, but we could drive all the way down to downtown to pick them up to bring them to McMahon. And then we have students that move between the school districts during the year, and they get grandfathered for transportation. All of those have added costs to this. So when we're sending a bus across town to drop off a kid that really should be going to Farwell, but they're going to McMahon, we're going gas mileage and routing to do that. And the problem with that is it could be many years because families get grandfathered in our district. So you're also seeing us adjusting for those things as we go through as well. So yes, we have a policy on the distance between schools.
If I may add, Alyssa, just a question. Is it fair to say, I believe we had a robust conversation either last year or the year before at the budget, during budget discussions around whether or not we adhere to that policy, and I don't think we necessarily do. Is that correct? We transport who wants to be transported, whether it falls within the mileage or not. Is that fair to say?
Absolutely. And then we also run into cases with daycares and divorced parents or families that have different transportation needs depending on the day of the week. And so very quickly, we get right outside of it. We have measured the path between Longley and the high school many times. Dawn has done that personally as well too. And so it really does create an interesting conversation, especially when you look at Connors Elementary in particular. And then it comes up with walking up Bartlett. Is that a safe area to send a child in grade school? And I think based on conversations, people have said maybe not so much, but is it written in the policy as it stands? No. So that might be another place the school committee should take a hard chance to look at some point when we are talking, because that impact will impact the budget.
Well, I appreciate that. And in our upcoming conversations about trying to make sure that kids go to the schools that are somewhere in the vicinity of where they live, I hope that we can all keep in mind that that is also a potential cost saver. You know, for my purposes, I am a huge advocate of students walking to school. I think that walking is good for people. I think that it's good for the planet. I think that it's good for our budget. And I think that if we had more people walking to school, then perhaps the city would care a little more about people who are walking. And so, you know, my hope would be that we would be trying to explore ways to make it so that more kids get the chance to walk to school. I walked to school where I grew up K to 8. And even though when I was walking to 8th grade, it was, you know, a mile and change and it's a long walk, it's an invaluable experience for people to be able to walk to their schools. So I hope that we look at that as a potential, not only cost saver, but also a benefit to student health and to the planet as a whole.
Ms. Wright.
Just for folks' edification, the policies being referred to are policy EEA, and then the street listing is under EEA-R in the policy manual. And Superintendent Langlis also referenced transportation for private school students earlier. I am not seeing that in policy.
I found that charter for you. I asked the city, I said, can somebody tell me how much money the city's going to pay for our kids that goes to St. Dom's? And we went on a treasure hunt, the city did, and they found it. I can provide that. I'll go back in my email. It's from like 1980 something, but it says that the city will be covering those costs. So I happily have sent that over to Heather Hunter for her, and that includes fuel costs in the buses. And what we found when we were redoing this is that we, for the buses that were sent, it equates to 2 full buses. And so we were only sending a bus and a half over to the city. Now the city is getting 2 full buses and the fuel costs associated with that. So we definitely, when we looked at reallocating, nope, city's getting theirs based on that charter.
Interesting.
It was a vote from the city. Yeah. So I'll find it for you and send it to you.
Cool. Thanks.
Just quick conversation, there are other areas in which that carries over as well. We get things like relief funds in other categories, and we're going to dig and look at the specifics, but there are components to each of those funding models that there are contributions that go toward the same kinds of formats, just so people are aware.
Yeah, I'll just add something. When I first went to the district, for strict policy and buck tooth and nail and loss, living within less than a mile of school, but couldn't get school transportation. And it's eased up, and I know from being a parent, it's an ease of mind knowing that your kids are on this bus being dropped off relatively pretty much right at their home if you're not home. So I would hope the district wouldn't go back to the old ways of what was being done back in 2000.
Taking a look at the street listings there because of Bartlett Street. I would walk down it to get here. I would not consider that a safe place for small children to be walking. Just myself. That's why we fought to get buses for those children. Way too fast on that road, but at the same time, it's for those speed bumps on you're going to have accidents. So.
What's interesting to know for the school committee too, when you're looking at those street listings, is just a little reminder that if we have inclement weather, a snowstorm was to hit us tomorrow, it takes the city roughly 5 hours to clear those city streets and sidewalks. So when we talk about walking as well, that's one of the things that we have to be aware of when we're looking at, are we gonna have a school day or are we gonna have another one in June? Because we literally can't clean the streets to make that safe for the kids to walk to school. So that's another thing we have to take into consideration.
That's true here in Lewiston. I know just what it means by clearing the sidewalks. Yes, read rotation minutes, I mean them.
Take five. Right? We take five. Are we all set with transportation? Have we covered all the areas?
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We'll take five before we jump into Article 9, sorry, figure.
Thank
It's not thinking.
Thank you.
All right, so we're going to move it out to Article 9, facilities maintenance. I believe Facilities Director Josh Bro is with us. Did share with you by email the
I got a budget memo in my hand of Josh's hands today.
As Josh gets ready to jump in, a couple things I want to share that I have some concerns about some of our infrastructure, and I know some others do as well. And so we put some things in by CIP, like the middle school heat. Want to be real mindful about any relief funds that can be applied, that we look at where we can, infrastructure related things that will help sustain our buildings and keep them running. Buildings without heat in the winter, buildings that have roofs that leak, or things of that nature are something that I think we have an ability with some relief funds to try to get after. So we need to continue to work on that. And the middle school heat, which is a pressing concern, is a proposed LCIP, which we can talk about later, but it's yet to be approved. It's an item that it was in part, not in full request. But Josh has a nearly impossible task to control and run the facilities of our entire district. And one of the things that we'll bring up, I think, moving forward is looking at something, whether it's permissible and relief funds or local funds, the project manager, someone that can help, whether it's in part or a full-time position, look after some of these items. That really takes someone to have eyes on. And in a district this size, it's a pretty tough ask to ask one person to do that. So you may hear me bring that up down the road again. It's something I really think we could have to help facilitate. It's LCIP items or just other projects that we've taken on as a district that are needed, that don't have the human capacity to follow all the guidelines, get 3 quotes, vet those folks, make sure that they can meet federal guidelines to meet federal law for employment, so you can carry out the task with federal funds. And that's just one layer. So I just want to share that in the front. And Josh, thank you for all your work. Feel free to jump in whenever you're ready.
Alicia had her hand up. Did you have a question before we start, or?
Yeah, so just looking at the article, it's broken out into operation and maintenance of the plant and LCIP. Are these LCIP should be in the LCIP, right? Like, why is it? I'm not understanding why that's here. And if we could just start there, I might be able to pay attention better moving forward.
So it's the accounting code structure. So LCIP for facilities belongs in facilities, and then bonded debt service, like bonds for new schools, for major capital, go into Article 10. So these aren't major, they're not, some of them are, but they're not major capital as deemed by the state, as deemed by the Department of Education. So all LCIP at the local level goes into facilities. That's why they're broken out.
So the conversation we have
it's really
here,
very transparent too. So you can see it better.
So the conversation we have now and parking lot and vote wise, would that impact what then goes through the council for LCIP?
No, so how it works here, I reach out to Heather, I ask her how much, it's all an estimate, right? Because we don't know what's going to be approved. So we have to put an estimate in, we have a discussion through these workshops, and then, and I think that the city planning board would like us to change the way we have a discussion about the LCIP process, which I would agree if we could do that. And I think you said maybe it was based on charter.
Yeah,
as to how we go about doing it.
Recommendation is in charter and the timing of it.
Yeah, it's backwards. It's a little bit
yeah,
off.
it strikes me as really odd.
It is off.
Okay, and I was like, I'm not going to be able to concentrate. So thank you for letting me ask that right up top. Thanks.
Yeah.
It's all you, Josh.
Sounds good. Good evening, everybody. Let me know if my microphone has any issues. My computer at times will have some issues, but it's nice to see you all this evening. I'm going to spare you the the opening speech. I think what I sent in the memo to Jake last night that he forwarded on today pretty much is exactly what I would probably state anyway. So for matter of time savings, I'll jump over that. Just say it's been a pretty challenging year. You know, the last 360 days or whatever it is, 370 days, I should say, have been pretty tricky. We're getting through, but we still have a lot of work to do. And I have high hopes and high visions for our buildings and those that occupy it. And I'm at this point ready to field any questions you may have regarding my budget.
Looking for the detail of page 53. Detail budget.
Ms. Wright.
So kind of jumping off what I asked right at the top, can you verify, Director Bro, about in the operation and maintenance of the plant, those are all recurring costs or supplies? Are there any one-time projects in there?
Yeah, so if you look, typically those cost codes are going to be 054300s. What those are our typical operational expenses, as well as any what I would call smaller projects, things that don't qualify for LCIP or very large projects or special funding, things of that nature, things specific to a specific school regarding things that they need to do in that building, whether that's replacing carpets or changing lights or redoing a BCT floor. It's projects like that. As you group those together and do them throughout the district, that's typically where we'll start chasing LCIP money and things of that nature. So it is some project work, but it's mostly all the maintenance agreements that we have to maintain our HVAC, our fire suppression system, our fire alarm system, getting our fire extinguishers checked, all our life safety stuff. It's everything that we have with that, plus historical averages of typical repairs to electrical systems and plumbing systems and things of that nature. So, when I got here, I kind of looked back 3 years, and I've been looking back every year to see where we kind of spend our money, and we adjust those operational expenses. Some go up, some go down, and for the most part, the operational expense, what drives the change are those special projects that we're trying to do at each school.
So
I'm surprised I didn't ask this to anyone else before, but the mention of maybe a project manager or some future position, I'm curious if you, and maybe I'll ask Bobby this for more of the HR side of things, if there are organizational charts for understanding workflows in some of these areas. I think as we look at adding that kind of support, I think it's likely very warranted. I think that might help contextualize all that folks are overseeing in these director positions, because it could really vary from department to department.
So I don't know if there's a question in there, but I do want to say, so we chose to call this a project manager, but one could call it an assistant facilities director. We chose to use the term project manager because project manager could actually spread out beyond facilities. I mean, we could use it in the world of technology. It could cross into different departments, and with all of the work that we have going on just between facilities and technology, wow, we're beyond capacity, we're at capacity. And that's one of the complaints, at the city level is we're not able to get all of our LCIP money spent timely. And in part, it's because we don't have the capacity to really get the project started and seen to completion. I would highly recommend that we have a discussion or that be considered, whether it's through the general fund or federal dollars.
So that wouldn't be like a specialization for like a construction project manager. It would be general project manager. And what is the amount for that?
We have 75, hold on, just make sure I'm telling you the right thing. $75,000 in the budget for that. And that's found on line 2240. And the increase in that line is 106,421. 75,000 of that 106 is that project manager, and the rest is contractual.
Awesome, thank you.
Mr. Driscoll.
Yeah, I'll keep this relatively brief. I'm inclined to ask that all of the proposed items that were reduced internally under facilities be included in the parking lot and ask the committee to restore them. I think that funding facilities is absolutely critical to the long-term viability of our district. And I think that when we shortchange ourselves on infrastructure today, that is a dismal idea for our long-term prospects. I'm willing, I guess, to hear parts of that 707, 910 that that the administration really believes ought to be funded through COVID, so that when I come back to this during the amendment process, it can be an accurate number that's presented.
Mr. Poppins.
So Josh, I just want to be clear. So let's say we get lucky and we're told we get to put in the $3.5 million CIP request. Does that go into that line item that you're speaking of, all of it? Or is that going to be chopped up? In other words, like, where's the middle school ventilation system? Is that going to fall under that line?
Bobby, do you want to take that one, or do you want me to jump on that one?
I'm happy to take that one. So those all LCIP projects are broken out, as we just discussed a few minutes ago, under the LCIP category, which starts with 269, and then it follows up with the cost centers. You can see in your budget detail, if you're looking at that, it specifically states in the budget LCIP bond interest or LCIP bond principal, and then after that, it lists the school. And so if you look specifically at the middle school, it says LCIP bond interest LMS or bond principal LMS. That is where you're going to see, and there's multiple, so it's not just one LCIP project. I mean, there's many different LCIP projects that we're still paying for that have happened in the past. But in this particular line that I'm talking about, that's where you're going to see the payment, the estimated payment for that. If that LCIP went through and it was used for the middle school, that's where you would see it. And that is where I've put it in.
So Bobby, let me ask you the question. I don't see an increase in LCIP.
If so, you
number did use that $3.5 million CIP to estimate that number.
It's an amortization schedule out over a number of years. And so the payment actually is $75,000 estimated, $75,000 a year. So the full 3.5 doesn't go into the budget. It's spread out over an amortization time period. And that hasn't happened yet. That actually, once, it goes through the whole approval process, our really great finance director at the city, she takes care of all of our bonding for us. And at which point we receive an amortization schedule. She has provided me with an estimate of what it might look like. But I don't know the terms of that bond. I don't know what that would look like. That we're not even there yet. But so when you look, Member Potvin, at those two account lines, they do net to a positive if you're just looking at LMS. But please remember that with any debt service, whether it's LCIP or the traditional debt service, which we'll talk about next, there are things that roll off and then there are things that come on. And so in this case for LCIP, we've done a really, well, one could say we've done a good job and one could say you haven't done a good job at all, because overall our LCIP costs, even with adding the payment for LMS, if that's what we end up going with and get approved to do, we're down $40,000. So we've had a lot of LCIP debt service roll off.
Josh, a quick question. How many employees you got working under you under maintenance? Not the custodians, but rather maintenance. People that can actually jump into a building and fix things.
Technically 4. I do have 5 people on what is considered the maintenance staff, but one of those is the district's nutrition driver or delivery person, for lack of a better term. They deliver food throughout the district. They run the mail between buildings back to Dingley, down to City Hall, things of that nature. But when we are not in session, or if it's a vacation week, that person then comes to facilities to support what we have going on for projects.
In your memo, you state that you don't feel that you're at where you should be to be able to handle things. How much closer does this increase of 598,000 get you to where you want to be?
Well, that doesn't do anything for staffing levels.
Do you have an estimate of what? I only ask this question because we have an aging high school. We've got a building in Longley that needs significant work. We've got significant projects at the middle school. We got CIP projects that are sitting there waiting to be done or aren't really where they should be. And then we're looking at taking on other CIP projects. So I'm just wondering, do we have a plan when it comes to workers of what we can do, what we're going to take responsibility for in the school system? Or is this always just going to be throw it out the bid and, you know, whatever we can get for a bid for a project and do it that way?
We will never have the capacity to handle things that are in an LCIP project. That's why they are funded and outsourced. With a staff of 4, we are in a currently or always will always be in a reactive mode. Those gentlemen are out there repairing the items that we have in our buildings. But when it comes to large HVAC systems or sprinkler systems, things of that nature, there's only so much our guys can do. Whether it's licensing capacity, lack of tooling, lack of the additional manpower we need, things that we do, you know, there are items that I do try and cut some corners on to save costs for the taxpayers. Where we can, we buy HVAC equipment. I have a universal refrigeration technician's license. So when we add ductless split systems as needed, where needed, I'm able to buy that equipment direct, save the markup from a installer and pay an installer to come in and just put it in for us. And our current service provider, Siemens, is very willing to do that work with us and for us. So we try and come up with some creative ideas to stretch the limited funds that we do have. But when it comes to tackling these LCIP projects, we're talking really large, multiple trade projects that need project coordinators and multiple staff members from those outside companies to come in and do that work for us. We can barely get these projects up off the ground and do our best to manage them. We will never be able to do them to self-perform those tasks.
So the 598 includes no positions.
Say that again, I'm sorry.
598,000, that doesn't account for any positions.
That is correct.
No, it's not correct. It includes a project manager at $75,000.
Oh, my apologies.
That one's in there. Okay.
Any other questions, comments, discussion? Mr. Dana?
Josh, I know it's a question we've talked about before too. We've got several of the buildings that are relatively new and in pretty good shape. This one in particular. But there's a significant amount of environmental control work that needs to be accomplished in many of the buildings, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, as you know, Bruce, most of this HVAC equipment has a typical life expectancy of 15 to 20 years, and most of our buildings are running on original equipment. So take the high school, for example, that was built in the mid-70s. It's 45 plus years old. We're on borrowed time on that stuff. It's just asking to fail.
Absolutely, and I don't disagree. I do think that, you know, when we start talking about managing major projects as we go forward, if we're able to fund any of it with CARES funds, we're going to need that extra support person. or we're not gonna be effective at doing it.
Absolutely.
Even if we have somebody else do it, even if we have Siemens do it, no different than like the expansion at the high school, you have to have almost like a clerk of the works. And we have multiple projects going on, it really, I really think that the project manager or project coordinator is a critical piece if we're going to move forward and consistently, like we talked about trying to do. The planning board was on our case because we weren't doing a good job of promoting LCIP. Well, one of the reasons we can't is because we're short manpower. So this is a position that really would help us get to a far better place as far as planning and moving forward in a logical, consistent manner that's going to sustain what we got. So I'm fully in support of this project manager position, and I think it's long overdue.
And if I could add, we run schools. So kids come here 5 days a week, or right now 4, and it's not easy to pull off some of these projects with only Josh by himself and buildings being full most hours of most weeks, weekend usage that in typical times. And so you can't, for example, the high school system is something that we have some growing concerns over because of the controls. But that's heat, that's ventilation, it's all of that. We can't have that go down for 3 months and just fix it, even if we had the money or the means to do it. So there's a lot of that project management, clerk of the works type conversation that it's actually very difficult to ask just someone to do, because we also have to navigate the fact that the schools are being used on a regular basis. Summers aren't off anymore. We got the vacations, we've got the gap in August sometimes, but summers are no longer off. Things have just shifted fundamentally, and it just only creates so much time for the work to be done.
If I could add, if I may, Josh, you probably don't know this, but you should look it up, and maybe you do. How much square footage do we have in this district total?
I don't know
know?
off
You
the
don't
top
know?
of my head, but I want to say it's like 1.5, 1.8 million, something like that.
And then we also have grounds. And I know that we don't do all of the grounds work. We do have some help from the city to do that. But I do want to point out that we have 4 incredible maintenance folks that take care of that 1.5 million square footage, and it's not enough. So I don't know if anybody is thinking that or not, but it is not enough to manage a very large district with 4 maintenance folks.
And how many buildings, Josh? 12, 13?
Yeah, it's 7 schools and 5 outbuildings, give or take, more than that actually, with the modulars and things of that nature. So yeah, 15 to 20 realistically.
So I would just say that having done school construction projects, trying to cram them into summers is an incredible challenge, even for when you can staff up multiple trades. If there was one thing about the shutdown that happened in 2020, there were a lot of school projects that got done more efficiently because school was closed. I'm not advocating that school should be closed, don't get me wrong, but some places, some districts really were able to take advantage of the shutdown and get projects done that would have taken 3 years to get done and got them done in 1 season. It was a nightmare doing it. We did 3 ourselves as our company. And I can only tell you that had it not been for the shutdown, we'd still be on every one of those projects while we're juggling it with the kids in school. So it's these projects that when you try to cram them into summer, they become a horror show, and it costs extra money because it's extra time, it's extra overtime, and everything else. So if we can plan to do our projects properly and manage them properly, we can make them more efficient. But it's not easy. It's certainly not something one person can do for a district of this.
Bruce, I echo that as well with the project that we have going at the high school. There have been I don't want to say the whole reason that we're on budget and on schedule is because we've had those extra windows where we've had remote learning happening more often, or we've had some weeks where we've had to close down. We have those Wednesdays, but I can tell you, in our project meetings on that project, we've been able to schedule some work in those windows that would have come later, that would have been a lot harder to do. Some of those things have helped us stay on schedule and on budget because we had those windows and they were very small and we made the most of them. And then to what you were talking about, as far as those large projects that you're involved in, we 100% did exactly that with the limited resources and staff that we had in our schools. We got, I'm going to go out on a limb and say probably somewhere between 90 and 95% of our buildings painted, which is a huge, it's a huge motivational factor for the staff that comes back after such a traumatic event to find a school that's in better condition than they've ever seen it. I remember specifically back in April, making promises to every building administrator on a screen just like this with a bunch of smiling faces looking at me saying, if you don't come back to school with your staff and students next year or whenever we come back, saying that your school isn't looking better than it ever has, then I failed you. And I haven't heard anybody complain yet. So we did that. And much like was talked about in the adult ed discussion, that's exclusively on my staff. Their willingness to work, put in extra time, do what needs to be done, stay extra, administration being willing to approve some overtime to get those projects done in the windows that we had. That was a huge bonus for us. But we stretched the limited funds we had. If we had a lot more money and a lot more things planned and ready to go, we could have used that time a little more effectively, but we made the best of it with what we had, 100%.
Mr. Poppin.
So Bobby, I guess I would add that to the parking lot maintenance, staffing levels, maintenance in terms of trades, carpenters, et cetera, so on, not the custodian piece, that's something separate.
You got it.
And Josh, I got one last question for you, and that is, we've heard so much from the city about our planning for CIP. What's a realistic timeline for you guys to be able to put together a 5-year CIP plan? Yeah.
I would say within 6 months, if we can get the facility subcommittee together. You don't think that's accurate, Bobby?
No, I don't at all. I think that, well, I agree with the facilities subcommittee, but we need to have some type of facilities assessment done in some way, shape, or form before we can put something together that is viable, credible.
Bobby, do you think with unexpended funds this year, if we can take a look, that we might be able to pull off a facilities assessment in the current fiscal year?
Yes. Yeah. I do.
Anything else?
Bobby, where we looked at the LCIP numbers that are associated with LMS, is much of that the original, the expansion that was put on about 5 years ago, that we're still paying that off?
I don't have that at my fingertips. Let me just look.
If you look at line 22, like 2292, those interest and principal payments, is that paying off the bonds where we did expansion at our middle school?
So I don't have that information at my fingertips, but I'm happy to pull that and get back to you on Monday.
Good question. So we would need a facilities assessment, and would Josh and his people not be able to give us that, or would they work collaboratively? Is that?
That's a collaborative process. What we want to do, or what my idea, what I presented to Bobby, that I think is the way to do it, is to bring in an outside contractor that we would sub out to assess those systems for us. That gives us an unbiased view and snapshot of our building. And what comes from that is a roadmap for the next 5, 10, 15, 20 years with estimated costs to make those changes. So they'll come to you and say, your boilers are this old, in 5 years you need to replace them, it's going to be approximately this. And they'll do that for just about every system, whether it's life safety, sprinklers, fire alarm, HVAC, electrical. We can have them assess roofs, we can have them assess parking lots, we can have them do all of those things. It really comes down to how deep do we want to dig, and how many of those kinds of systems do we want to have assessed?
And if I may add, so there are things we can do on our own. The bigger things we would recommend, that we don't necessarily have the expertise in. We would recommend having somebody from the outside do that. But there are certainly things that we can definitely do on our own to provide information to that report.
Ms. Wright.
We talked about this earlier, but gosh, we can never remember the name of it either. The regional center, service center.
Yes.
I'm having a recovered memory that we talked about pooling that money, those funds, to do some sort of system-wide facilities assessment. Is that right?
I don't recall that.
My time on that committee was brief, so I'm not entirely certain, but when we were talking about use of the funds, there was talk about using it for pooled diversity and equity resources. There was talk about, I thought, facilities assessment, but perhaps the other districts had already used Siemens to do one.
I can say that we've had many conversations about what we could do together, in collaboration, but that hasn't been one of the items that was agreed upon.
Okay.
At the service central level. I don't remember that one coming up, but I'm not saying it didn't.
Yeah.
But I know for sure that's not one that the whole service center agreed to.
Okay, and can you remind us, does the service center have to re-agree every year, or?
Yeah, so we didn't do our part, and when I say our part, I mean all of us, all 4 districts, through the pandemic. We didn't meet and do our thing, which was fine. I mean, the DOE, nobody was doing that.
Right, yeah.
But yeah, we need to get back together and come up with. We're still collaborating with Auburn. We still have our food service bid that we collaborate with and have some cost sharing there or cost savings there. We have our weather service. So everything that was in place prior to the pandemic is still in place today. But if we really, if we're doing a really, great job at it, we would come up with some additional services and really dig deep into establishing greater savings.
Yeah, I just think that might be an opportunity, and it's pinging in my head for some reason, but that would have been well over a year ago that we would have talked about that. So just curious if some of those contracted services might be, the bid might go better if it were for 4 of the districts.
And it's definitely something we can talk about.
First, I want to apologize to everybody for eating while we're talking about this, but my stomach, just thinking of all these schools and the work they need, is really causing some stomach acid issues right now. I was lucky to grow up in a place where a significant portion of money was put aside every single year for schools and education. I really, really, really wish that there was a way to get the money together to get this stuff done, because it clearly hasn't been done for a long time and needs to happen. I would hope, and I would actually probably send some email to some people I know in my ward and in the town and be like, you need to go watch the budget video from the other night and really listen to what we talk about. Because it is clear to me that there is work that desperately needs to be done, that has been ignored for a long time. And we need voters to accept that the chickens have come home to roost or are on their way. And we either fix the chicken coop or we lose our chickens. That's simple. I'm sorry, but the situation with the boiler at LMS, I remember going to adult ed classes in the high school. God, I don't even remember how long ago now. I'm roasting to death in a classroom and thinking, God, can't we just do this outside in the shade? My frustration level is a little high right now, so I'm gonna stop there, but
And I think without, you know, there may be different trends on the assessment, but those are some of those big cost items that I want to figure out how we can manage them, whether it's LCIP or internally, budget wise, and or relief funds. But those are the things we know about. When we have an assessment, we may come across things that we are unaware of because it's not plain sight or been brought up by someone else. And so we have to take care of our facilities. We're not going to be next in line for a new high school. We have to take care of our facilities.
I have a question for you. If we have been receiving state funding at the level we should have been for years now, would any of this have been easier to get done? Or would we still be in this quagmire? Do you have an idea?
Funding is a really big conversation overall. I don't want to digress into what could be a long conversation, get lost in the weeds. I don't think it's just a point of finger at the state, and I don't think it's just a point of finger locally. I think the funding formula as it exists for schools in general is off as a nation. So I guess I don't want to get lost in that. But I mean, if we had more funding, could we do some of the things that we don't need to do? I think the answer is yes.
If I could add so that this committee knows to the level at which we research and we look into additional funding elsewhere, I have contacted the Department of Education. In my former district, we used school revolving renovation fund monies, which depending on what district you're in, your loan could be forgiven anywhere between 30 and 70%, and it's at 0% interest. So I did reach out to them to say, hey, when are you going to open up that application so that we can fill it out? We have not at Lewiston Public Schools participated in school revolving renovation fund projects since 2010 is what the Department of Education shared with me. And that's too bad because there's a lot of money sitting there, or there was a lot of money sitting there. She did inform me, she meaning the person at the Department of Ed, they're probably not going to open up applications for that work for another couple of years. They're waiting for a lot of that debt to be paid down so that they can then open it up. But when that opens up, I would highly recommend that we fill out the applications for that. And they do tell you specifically what the money can be used for. And it's typically this kind of stuff. And it is, I can't guarantee you, but I bet we would have a very large portion of that debt forgiven right off the bat, just because of our disadvantaged rate. But I'm not sure, but I bet we would. And it's no interest, it's 0% interest. So we need to take advantage of that when it opens up.
That's a really good point. I know for a fact that Auburn had utilized that quite extensively. I know 3 projects that they did 3 consecutive years, which changed ventilation and heating systems in Fairview, Walton, and the middle school. And it was several $1 million each project. And that was all out of that revolving fund, and they just went one right after another. So that's a place where we probably, if it comes open, it's a great source for us to do some of these projects at really low cost.
And if I could add one more thing, just because I love this topic, and Josh and I have talked about it a little bit, but it's around looking at performance contracts and really looking at whether or not that would help save us money, get some work done, look at the debt that we currently have, what's going to be rolling off, what year it's going to be rolling off, when do we feel we could add additional debt on through a performance contract. So there's different resources that we could utilize. There's 2 right there that we haven't looked at in this district in a long time. But I would suggest that when we get the facilities committee up and running, that we start talking about that.
Anything else on facilities? Josh, thank you very much. Next up, we have Article 10, which is debt service and other. So I'll throw the mic right to Bobby.
Thank you, Jake. So the other we talked about the other night, that's just a typo. So that was where our crossing guards were allocated or are allocated to. As far as the debt service article, I mentioned a little bit about that earlier. This is where that big capital improvement funds are. This is where it's budgeted. In our case, this is up $798,000 or 11.9%. That is all the LHS expansion. I do want to make note that that amortization schedule is actually $1 million. And we broke that out for you on the revenue side. So you could see what that looks like. The reason why this here says 798,000 is because we had debt service roll off. Any questions about that?
Yeah, I'm wondering about the funding on the expansion project, specifically over what length of time we're paying for it.
Oh, I'm not muted. Well, you would ask that question, and I don't have the amortization schedule sitting in front of me.
For some reason, I have it in my head as being a $13 million project.
It is.
Yep. So we're looking at about $1 million this year. So are we shouldering the whole 13, or is part of that coming from somewhere else?
No, we are. It's a local project that was approved through the referendum process.
Right.
100% local.
So at a rate of about $1 million a year.
I can get you the exact number for Monday.
Yeah.
Mr. Bobby.
So Bobby, I just want to be clear, as I speak to the public. The referendum, you have amortized it at $1 million on the revenue side, 1 million, but as far as the budget increase goes, debt service only goes up roughly $800,000.
That's right.
So when we talk about the increase of the 6.1 million that was presented by the superintendent, the actual cost, the increase is an 800,000 figure, not the million figure that's approved by the board.
So yeah, so here's where it gets a little bit complex. So you're right, the actual cost is that 800, but the 800 number, but on the revenue side, the taxpayers are obligated to pay the full debt service on that. So they're individual projects that are all lumped into one account number. And so even though some debt service rolls off, that means it's paid off. That doesn't mean that we reduce what the LHS expansion project is by that roll off. So it truly is on the revenue side, the taxpayer does have to pay based on the approval at referendum, that $1 million.
Okay.
Other items, Bob, you want to share about debt service?
No, there's nothing else that's driving that.
Give your hand up here, or you're trying with your hair.
No, I pulled both, but I have my hands up. This is not specifically related to debt service, and I don't know what article it's appropriately going. But one of the items that I brought up a couple months ago as a new agenda or future agenda item was the prospect of a stipend and district historian. And since we're going through a budget process, this would strike me as a time to put that in the parking lot. I don't know which article it would go towards, but I was thinking 1 or 2K and sort of in line with the standard stipend that a lot of folks are getting for various things. And the idea here would be, you know, to try to have a position, and likely it'd be, you know, a high school history teacher or something, but we could see who was interested. And have that person spend some time trying to ensure that the district had was doing what it needed to do to make sure that we had archives that were in good order and were being preserved, were being put into a form that was somehow useful, and then also trying to provide some work towards establishing for the district a history of public education in Lewiston, such that going forward we can have those resources, not only for the school committee to draw on, not only for staff and students in the district to draw on, but for the entire community to draw on. And so I'd like to put that in the parking lot, and I'll make a proposal, but I don't know where it would most appropriately be included.
I will, so I've added that to the parking lot, and I will do some research on the account code structure to find out what article would be appropriate.
Mr. Gainer.
Bobby, before we leave the LCIP, can you tell us what the authorized bonded expenditure, what we have authorized for bonding, the total for the district? I know the city's pretty significant, but I don't know exactly what the total is for the district.
Oh God, Bruce, I don't see those, see that sheet. So I can get it. I don't know the number off the top of my head.
I have a question, Bobby.
Bobby, the question was asked if that was a question for Heather.
Oh, yes. Yes, it is.
Okay.
That's right.
While we're doing just kind of a mixed bag of things, I wanted to ask when the parking lot list would be distributed to us. I am guessing sometime between the 15th and 17th when we have a full parking lot. And then just wanted to ask, in the spirit of how we move things forward on a policy side, are these going to come to us as individual items that need a motion and a second to fully discuss? I could imagine, and I don't need an answer from the chair now, but would like some thought given to the fact that I could imagine there's maybe one person who's in support of some of these items, and should we have a full-fledged discussion on everything if there wouldn't even be a motion and a second to add them or subtract them from the budget? Just some thoughts going forward for the process.
And just for transparency's sake, we're up to 43 items added to the parking lot. Admittedly, some of those I've highlighted as discussion items only that don't have price tags to them. But out of those 43, the price tag right now is up to $3.7 million. And I still need to add the maintenance position salary in there. I need to look that up.
Sure.
Oh, and the in-house legal, the legal number.
Yeah. So for the purposes of this conversation, are we looking at this being a process that we undertake on Wednesday, March 17th? It's labeled a review and a revision meeting. The only other logical time to have a series of votes and potential changes to the budget would be Monday, April 5th. But I think that the idea would be that the amendment would be addressed at a prior meeting, and then we'd be voting on a final budget. But I could be wrong about that.
If I may, is that okay with you, Superintendent Langlis?
Yeah, go
I would recommend that these discussions begin on the 17th. There's the 24th and the 31st if needed. I do think we're going to need them. And my hope would be, because I'll have to turn another rendition of the budget around to get to city council, and that takes some time. So my hope is that we could have discussions wrapped up, I mean, no later than the 31st, and that's really pushing it, so that we could come to an agreement on, because you have to adopt the budget on the 5th of April.
I have a follow-up, and this would be a suggested solution to the dilemma posed by Member Ray. Given the number of items in the parking lot from a number of members, but I've also asked for a lot, and I understand that. I think it would make sense to do a motion and second process, and that any items that didn't get a second just weren't. There was no need to have an extended conversation on it because there weren't two members in support. My only request would be that there be in the minutes of that meeting a reflection that those motions had been made and had not received seconds, just so that we can have a record of what was presented to the school committee as options.
I think we could potentially simplify it more than that. In that, if the list was sent out, we could all sort of weigh in which items, prioritize what needs to be discussed, I guess. Mr. Mayor's comments.
I'm afraid that we can't do that if it would amount to decision-making outside of a meeting, which it sounds like that would be the goal. It would be one thing to say, you know, this is the list of items and, you know, this is the order of priority in considering them. But for a decision to be made via a list like that would not be lawful. So if the school committee is going to make a decision about whether or not to make a change to the budget, that's a decision that has to be made at the school committee.
Go ahead, Jake.
Yeah, I guess a couple of things. One is I have a level of discomfort in bringing the budget as proposed plus $3.7+ million to the city council. I know that we have a duty to educate our students, do everything we can to provide the resources we can. I also don't want to alienate the taxpayers who, in my opinion, have done a good job in Lewiston. And I think most people are honored to pay their taxes and fund schools and fund the city process. So I don't want to get lost in what we want and create a process where, from a school perspective, we end up on the downside of a process where this doesn't make it through city and or referendum, and we struggle to run our schools. And if we don't have an approved budget, which I think is a really important thing to have and on time, that would be a challenge. And I want to just say out loud that as we go through a process, and if we vote on each of these items, if things are agreed upon by the committee to be added back, are we taking anything out? First, my first question. And then second, are we just moving forward with a budget that's proposed with individualized items that people collectively feel like they want to vote in? Because if we are, that's a slippery slope in my opinion, because we'll be bringing an item, a budget request that is well outside of my comfort zone, even though I understand the need of our kids.
Mr. Mayor's comments.
I appreciate the superintendent's concerns, but I would say that, you know, he has done his duty and fulfilled his responsibility to bring a budget that he can support to us, and now we have a responsibility to review that budget, to propose increases, to propose reductions, to propose amendments of all sorts, to deliberate on those amendments and decide as a body whether we want to add money in a particular place, cut money in a particular place, and to go through that process until we've arrived at a final budget. We all are, you know, representatives of various constituencies in Lewiston, and And that's our responsibility as elected officials, to go through that process, to say, we think that this should be included, we think that this shouldn't be included, and ultimately to arrive at a budget and then vote on that budget. You know, and I suspect that people in this committee have a wide range of ideas about what's an acceptable level of spending to ask for, but that's the deliberative process that we have to go through. And so, you know, I don't want the superintendent to feel as though, you know, that, you know, I think that the superintendent has done his job in bringing us a budget that he, in his judgment, feels like he can support and defend. And then we have to review that, and then we have to do our part in this process and send the council a budget that we can support and defend. And so that would be, you know, my hope that is that we could go through that deliberative process. And, you know, I expect that there will be proposals to add money back to the budget. There will be proposals to cut money from the budget. And ultimately that's something that we all have to do. Just that's what this job is.
Ms. Wright.
Thank you. I just wanted to say, with all due respect, I mean, there are some things in the budget that, you know, committee members have asked for, and there are some things not in the budget that committee members have asked for. And so as we move toward the deliberative process, I think there's going to become discussion points. And I'm not going to try to predict where we'll land, but I think, and with the superintendent's own admission, again, the bolded part of that budget memo was this budget does not meet the needs of our learners. And I think folks in that first conversation described how they would like to rise to that occasion and try to meet more needs. I get there's a huge level of discomfort with the numbers here, but I would personally advocate for a process where we begin to review these and begin to take motions and votes on them in a public sense. And I don't think we would get through the entire parking lot list on the 17th. And so my suggestion would be, you know, we meet for 3 hours, see what we get through, have Bobby come back to us with adjusted numbers on the 24th, finish up that list. So hopefully there is a complete addition and subtraction that she's able to work from at that point. I mean, there's so much to discuss, and, you know, the process is now in our hands to deliberate, debate, and vote upon.
Yes, Bobby.
I just want the committee to know that I'll be prepared to, in real time, make those adjustments and let you know where the budget number is at that time.
Thank you.
I just want to say really quickly to Bobby, I really appreciate how well you've done kind of holding our hands and walking us through this maze, because this is my first time through a budget. This is a lot of information, and there's been a lot of transparency. You've been really able to articulate to me what's what and where it is and how it works, and I really appreciate that. This is a very large budget with a lot of things in it, and honestly, I don't know how your brain hasn't exploded, but I really appreciate that it hasn't. Thank you, Bobby.
Thank you for saying that. That means a lot to me. I really appreciate it. I do want to say that there are, as your book reflects, there's 2,815 budget lines in this budget. Within those 2,815 budget lines, there are many individual expenses that are charged to those. And it's great. It's great work. It's big work. It's important work. And I'm proud and I'm glad to be able to do it with each of you. So thank you.
This is not the first time that I've been through a school budget. This is the second time, but it certainly feels like the first time. Because, you know, the deliberative and open process that we have entertained this year so far, and that I hope that we will see all the way through to the end, is one that stands in stark contrast to what we saw last year. And I do want to express my appreciation for the entire administrative team and their commitment to a transparent and open process that allows us to understand what's being presented and to weigh alternative ideas. That's just so different than what we did last year, and so I think it's a real improvement.
Mr. Buck.
Just to tap into my wisdom of my previous 19 budgets that I've done, a lot of time, there's been a lot proposed. I mean, we're already on 43. A lot of time can be wasted on items that don't have a consensus within the group to discuss. And I would suggest, and previous districts I worked in, went around and got a consensus first on items, whether there was at least 50% that wanted to have this discussion. Everything that's been put on, has been put on by 1 or 2 people so far. We can take a chunk and put it to the side. There might be stuff that needs further discussion and research. There's stuff that we could vote on right off the bat. If there's 6 people sitting there going, okay, I can see this point, you know, and take a vote. And the stuff that we can vote, let's vote on. The stuff that there's no consensus on, let's not have this long discussion that could take days on. And then if there's stuff that needs clarification, to put it to the next meeting, to come back to the administration to research. That's only my suggestion. It's just that one time I went through it, and I'd say there's a lot of suggestions made, and I gotta say we probably wasted 3 weeks talking about stuff that never passed, that never went on. And I think it's important that we know what the consensus is of what we want to talk about of these 43 items.
We already have had some extensive and some not so extensive discussion on all of these items that are on the parking lot. And so it's difficult for me to want to commit to having these discussions again on another date and reiterating all of the same information that we've already had. If there's a way that we can make it very streamlined, where it's literally item number 1 says this, who's on board with it or not, and just jump through them really quickly without having thorough discussions again on those items that we're not going, that don't need to move forward. I think that would be really helpful, but I don't want to get to a point where we're literally going down the list and having more discussion and more discussion and more discussion on what we've already discussed. Because that, I mean, we just don't have, we don't have the time for that in this budget schedule.
My process, I mean, I have a list, Bobby has it all in a spreadsheet. We've had discussions about the items, we know what they are, we're pretty familiar. If it could be a quick process, I think it would be beneficial to us. But I don't want to shut down people's options to speak to things that they're passionate about. I'm just really worried about trying to bring another 3.7 or 2.7 or 1.7 to our city and ask them to pay that bill.
Mr. Baker.
Yeah, I think Jake has a legitimate point. We're not supposed to be really a political body. We're affected by politics any way we cut it. We can take the budget, you know, expand it if that ends up being the case. Have it not be well received at city council, still take it to referendum and have it not pass. It has happened in the past. And if we can't get it passed, we live with the 2021 budget until such time as we get something else approved. We already know that this expanded budget that Jake has proposed is a big reach, and it's certainly significantly better than 2021, although 2021 was some extraordinary, hopefully never to be repeated year. We do have to be cognizant of the fact that we would be reverting to the budget from last year, this right now. That's all that we would have available. So there's a big risk, and this happened. I know that there's a district not far from the Greater Gloucester, that it was voted down 4 times, and it wasn't until the middle of November that they actually got into the new budget. So it can happen. And This year, I wouldn't take bets on anything this year. Seen it happen, it 3 years ago, it didn't pass on the first go around here. So there's a risk of doing this. We all need to be aware of that.
Mr. Driscoll.
Yeah, I would suggest that the chair's point about discussion is well taken, and that there's no need on a lot of these items for extensive back and forths. I think that we should be able to move through a good number of them fairly rapidly with motions, with seconds or not, and then with opportunity for brief statement followed by vote, and then just keep going down the list like that. And Vice Chair Damon raises an important point, and we all have an obligation to decide for ourselves what is the right way of approaching things. And then I would also stress, and I'm going to stress this throughout the rest of the process, that if members of this committee end up voting for the final budget, then I think that it's somewhat incumbent upon all of us to, number one, actually vote in the budget referendum when it comes around, and then also do outreach to our constituents and explain why we voted for the budget, and encourage them to go out and vote as well, and really follow through. That's what being a good representative entails. And obviously, if you vote against the budget, then do the same thing on the other side. But I think that we are not passive actors in a public referendum. We are going to know more about this budget than almost anybody who's discussing it. And, so we have a role to play in the public conversations about whether or not to pass the budget. And whether or not we voted for it, then we can advocate for the position that we had on the committee. But I want to plant that seed, because I'm going to be repeating it a lot, that, we have a role to play in making sure that whatever we end up voting for passes.
Ms. Rack.
I'm not going to echo some things that have already been said, but I do want to advocate that this process is deliberative and open, because the minority of the committee has a right to be heard still too. And so that's why I suggested we follow a motion and second process, so that it will be part of the public record who made a motion, even if it does fail for lack of a second. I realize that's a lot of note keeping for the superintendent, but I think if we go into it with knowing what the established process is, that makes it a lot easier to move through. I think the sooner we could see the parking lot, we could start making our own judgment calls on whether or not we'd be willing to motion or second to have that discussion, albeit brief. And I think coming to that shared understanding at this point in time, when we're only 3 hours deep into a meeting rather than a week from now, when we might go for a much longer time due to the volume of stuff on there, feels important to continue to preserve the right of the minority to be heard.
Bobby, do you think we could share the spreadsheet with the agenda for the 17th, or at least by Monday, so that?
Yeah, I'm happy to share it anytime you want me to share it. There are a couple, like I said earlier, there's a couple of numbers that I have to fill in, legal and maintenance, but I can share it anytime.
I think the sooner that the committee can have the list, the better, just for their reviewing if there are some moving pieces to it, because we get more information. And then if we could take the 17th, and our agenda essentially would be line by line, and here's the item, who wants to motion it, who wants to second it, any discussion, if there's a second, and it goes to vote. If there's no second, we just move down, and we try to work through the list.
So I'm going to send it out right after this meeting. Just be mindful that it won't include those two numbers, but it at least allows you to start noodling it around and thinking about it.
Mr. Driscoll.
I do want to raise one other point, which is that folks should be cognizant of the fact that as we move through a deliberative process in the budget, especially if you start adding items, there may be members of this committee who would seek to respond to those additions by finding other areas of the budget to cut. I likely won't support their initiatives, but I think that it's important for everyone to recognize that changing the budget may change what people propose as we move forward. So just to be aware that the parking lot list may not be the extent of it, because the parking lot list is mostly what people want to add. And if those additions start to happen, there may be folks on the committee who want to see things move in the other direction.
So just so I can visualize this, because that's how I process. There's items on the list that are in the budget currently that some members have asked to discuss potentially removing. And then there's some items on the list that are not in the budget, but members have asked to have discussion about adding. So how would this motion and second process go? So say item A is something that someone has asked, that's in the budget that someone has asked to have removed. We would just ask for a motion to have this item removed from the budget and then ask for a second for that. Is that correct?
Yeah, I think we would go through the items and by item, is there a motion? I'd put that to the group, or you could. If there's a motion, is there a second? If there's a second, you can have a discussion. I think the committee's agreed to try to keep that brief where applicable or possible, and then a vote, if it has a second. And then we would just go to the next item, and do it again.
Sounds good. Any other questions, comments, discussion? Is there a motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
Word 5.
Thank you.
6,
Yes.
7,
Yes.
city council.
Yes.
Yes. 1,
Yes.
2,
Yes.
3,
Yes.
4. Yes.
Motion to adjourn, passes 9-0 at 8:32.